Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my video review of a new lens from Sony. Those of you that are regulars to this channel know that I have frequently observed and maybe complained in the past that the APS-C space has been underserved by Sony, particularly when it comes to new lens releases. And while over the last about 18 months, I've seen a number of quality releases for APS-C and Sony E-mount, they have almost always come from third parties. But fortunately, Sony has not abandoned the APS-C space, which I'm sure to many of you is going to be a huge relief. And they are coming not with one, not with two, but with three new wide-angle lens releases. Those include a 10 to 20mm f4 power zoom OSS lens. It also comes with an 11mm f1.8, and then we have the 15mm f1.4 G lens from Sony, and that is the first of the ones that I'm going to be reviewing. I've been spending time with all three of the lenses, but I'm going to release them in a certain sequence, with this being the first, the zoom the second, and then the 11mm being the third of the series of reviews. This is a lens that is really intriguing for a number of reasons, and we're going to detail why as a part of this review here today. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist modern wallet that is now even better with the new Phantom X that is crafted from aluminum right here in Canada. It is 22% smaller and 35% lighter, while still making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. You could even customize your wallet due to its modular design, with accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even Chipolo and AirTag tracking integration. Visit store.phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber, and use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out.
So Sony had some certain priorities in designing this new series of lenses. First of all, there's a recognition that there is a growing number of what we would call hybrid shooters. Not people that do exclusively video, not people that do exclusively photography, but rather people that do some combination of the two. And that's really true in the APS-C space, as Sony kind of established itself there as a video hybrid type platform. So there's a lot of room for lenses that are designed around some of the unique needs, not just of purely video or purely photography, but some balance of the both. And so Sony has done their very best to design very compact lenses that are going to be useful for vlogging or bringing along when you want to travel light, run and gun type footage or photography. And of course, there's a lot of us that prioritize photography over video who still really love to be able to travel light. And I'll note that in my typical bag that I like to use, it's a bag from Cecilia that I carry, a nice leather bag. I have had plenty of room for a camera and all three of these lenses to transport around, and that to me is fantastic to be used for things like that. And so we've got a lens here that is extremely compact. Now, the closest competing lens that you really have to look at is Sigma's 16mm f1.4. It's closer to the classic 24mm with the Sigma. This is more like 22.5mm, but obviously has a wider angle of view, but a similar maximum aperture. But when you talk about weight, this lens weighs in at 218 grams, which is about 46% lighter than what the Sigma is. Well, that's a significant difference when you're talking about weight, and although neither lens, of course, is incredibly heavy, we're talking getting very close to 50% weight premium and going to the Sigma. So kudos to Sony for giving us a wider angle of view, harder to engineer, but also being able to keep the weight down. The same is true when it comes to the overall dimensions. It is 65 by 69 millimeters, so 65 millimeters in diameter with a 55 millimeter front filter thread and only 69 millimeters in length. And so when you're talking about the bare lens itself, this certainly is a lens that will fit in the palm of your hand. And so it is a lens that is extremely compact despite having wide angle of view and a wide maximum aperture. But despite being very compact, it is in many ways kind of reminiscent of last year I reviewed a series of G primes for Sony for full frame, including a 24mm f2.8 and then a 40 and 50mm f2.5 lens. And in that case, I looked at them as being extremely compact, yes, but also premium. They had advanced features like weather sealing, and then they had kind of the full suite of features very similar to what GM lenses have. And that's true here as well. Starting with the aperture, you've got 3 different ways to control aperture. You can choose to manually control it with 1/3 stop detents here, and so you have lots of finite control over aperture through that means. You can go all the way to the right, and there's a hard stop that you have to push past, and then you can get into automatic mode where you can control it from within the camera. But then, like the GM lenses on the right side of the barrel, there is a switch that allows you to declick the aperture, and so that you can rack smoothly through the various aperture values, which again is more of a video specific feature, although there may be some of you that just prefer that kind of control. Well, you've got that option here. So 3 different ways to control aperture. And beyond that, we also have the focus hold button and the AF/MF switch, which makes this lens thus very similar to any of the G Master lenses in terms of the feature sets available. Likewise, we have got a full weather sealing here, which starts with the gasket at the mount, but then there are also various seal points inside at the, the switches and the rings, and so that gives you a lot of control over that. The actual focus ring located towards the front moves nice and smooth, and it is linear in operation, again with a nod to the requirements of video, so you can get repeatable focus throws, though I will note that the weight and the damping is on the light side, and so it doesn't have as much kind of feel or precision as the very best focus rings, but at the same time, the fact that it's linear is going to be a very useful thing. There are 7 aperture blades inside, and what we have is a lens that is very compact, easy to bring along, but very highly featured and high performing. Now, interesting here, we have a dual minimum focus distance. You can focus down to 20 centimeters if you're using autofocus, but you can focus a little bit closer, as close as 17 centimeters if you are manually focusing. And that actually makes a big difference in the outcome of the magnification. If you're using autofocus, your maximum magnification is only 0.12 times. But if you focus closer manually, it allows you to bump all that way up to 0.17 times, which is obviously going to be even more useful in a variety of applications and allow you to get, fairly close, detailed images like some of these that I'm showing here. Now, what's also interesting is that Sony has gone kind of next level in terms of the autofocus here. And again, given this somewhat of a GM treatment, in that we not only have one linear motor, we have dual linear motors that are driving focus in the 15mm f1.4 G lens. That means as a byproduct that autofocus is really fast, it is really quiet in operation, and it is very smooth because there's lots of torque from having that dual motor driving it. Now, interestingly, when I tested on my A6400, I found that focus pulls were surprisingly slow. Considering how much speed is available on tap, and I knew from stills how fast it was. So I thought that curious, so I threw it on my full frame cameras like my Alpha 1 or my A7 IV, and I found that, as you can see here, that focus pulls were much faster, and thus I was able to do my tests like the hand moving in front, and been able to do that just fine, as I would expect from the overall performance of the lens. So I think that may be a pre-release A6400 quirk, because focus speed is going to be perfectly fine. So maybe a firmware update needs to address that issue, but not a big deal at the end of the day, because either way the focus pulls were confident and smooth. They just took longer on my A6400. I also noted that focus speed was really fast for shooting stills photography. For example, I saw a kayaker about to shoot into rapids, and I knew I had to get up and around the bend to get a vantage point. So I was running up there, and they were already into the rapids, and so I just had to bring the camera up. This is the A6400, and immediately fire off a shot. Even though I was at f1.4, the shot is perfectly focused, and I was able to immediately take the shot. It just locked on. I didn't lose the shot because it was hunting or searching for focus. And so that obviously is a huge boon for photography in general. Likewise, whether I was shooting up close objects or shooting at a distance, I was able to get accurately focused results. And this shot of a couple of young people looking over the water, I shot at f1.4, shot from a little bit of a distance, but I was able to perfectly focus on them. That's obviously going to be important because this is the kind of lens that I can see being used for wedding photography or for portrait photography when you want more of an environmental shot, but you want to be able to take advantage of different lighting conditions, which the f1.4 aperture allows you to do. I did also shoot landscapes in very dim lighting. The light was fading, but I saw this beautiful place as I was driving by, so I was shooting at only at like f2, but because the lens is very sharp, as we'll see in a moment, I was able to get detailed images, great focus in that setting, even though I was capturing the very last light of the day. So very high praise from me when it comes to the autofocus here. And in many ways, I think that kind of sets it apart from similar premium primes on the Fuji platform, where a lot of times the larger aperture primes just don't have amazing autofocus in the way that you're going to see here. So let's talk about the image quality, because other than one sour note, this is a very high performing lens optically. Let's dive in and let's take a look.
So let's get the bad news out of the way early. This is definitely a lens that suffers from some significant barrel distortion. As you can see here on the left, there is a lot of the frame that needs to get cut off to get a squared off result. I suspect this lens is wider than 15 millimeters to accommodate for the post correction. Now, as you can see here on the right side, this is a manual correction, so at least the nature of the distortion here is quite linear, and I was able to correct it by inputting a plus 39. So that's a lot of barrel distortion to correct for it, but as you can see, it's able to get pretty straight lines out of that and no like mustache type pattern, and so that's good. As far as vignette goes, vignette is moderate for a lens this size, not really too bad. A plus 42 to correct for it and sliding the midpoint, not quite all the way over, gave me a pretty clean end result. Now, this being a first party lens, it will get excellent profile corrections in camera and then later in software. They're just not here yet because this is a pre-release copy, and so it's not in software, although already in camera we're getting corrections on JPEGs and video. Now, you will want to see that corrected, because if you've got some straight lines, in certain spots, like you can see here, you can see some of that bulge that is there as far as just the distortion. Now, on a positive note, even at f1.4, you can see great detail here and only minimal fringing, even against this very high contrast background. Another case in point here, as far as the fringing goes, we can see that there's a little bit of some green fringing there in the bokeh highlights and high transition, but what we can also see is that contrast is excellent. It's not affecting contrast. You can see that even here at f1.4, we've got a nice three-dimensional quality to the branch that looks, all the better the closer that you examine it. Likewise, some early morning dew on the grass, and so you can see if we look at the bokeh highlights here, just a little bit of green fringing. It very quickly transitions to something more neutral, and the overall effect, I think, is pretty positive. Quick look at the edges of the frame, stop down a bit for lateral chromatic aberrations. Nothing has been corrected here, so you can see just a little bit of some purple fringing that is there, but again, it's not significant. It would be easily correctable and not a major issue at all, and the overall look of the image, of course, is fantastic. So let's take a look at resolution and contrast. This is on a 24 megapixel Sony a6400, and we're at 200% magnification here. You can see in the center of the frame, even at f1.4, it is fantastic. Very sharp, good contrast. Mid-frame also looks really excellent, and as we pan down, it's looking strong and still looks fairly decent in the corner, but you can see there is a little bit of a drop-off towards the very extreme corner. Now, even stopping down to f2 significantly improves that corner performance. And so, I mean, if you're looking for, all across the frame performance, anywhere between f2 and about an f11 is going to give you really great across the frame results. Now, if we look at a real-world shot at 100% magnification, you can see that as far as resolution and contrast in the center of the frame, things between f1.4 and f2, they only look, minorly different. It's mostly going to be into the corners where you can see that sharpness continues on, even though obviously in real world you're impacted somewhat by depth of field. Now, if we compare f2 to f5.6, we can see that as you stop on down, there really isn't a huge difference. And so comparing, you can see that as we kind of pan here across the frame, that things start to look just ever so slightly better in the corners, but The truth of the matter is that you're getting most of your resolution from f2 on, and depth of field obviously increases, and so this front corner looks better. But that kind of tells you the story of this lens. This is a lens that really you can use aperture for the most part for determining depth of field, but even in low light situations you can shoot at wider apertures and still get very good results. Case in point, here I was catching the very last light of the day, and so it was getting very dark outside. So I was shooting at f2, but I did want to capture the scene, and you can see that I got a nice looking end result even shooting at f2 in dim light. And that's the advantage of having a lens for which it is sharp, wide open like this. Now your peak apertures for across the frame sharpness are going to be here at f5.6 and f8. So as you can see at 200%, they look really fantastic everywhere that you look, all the way across the frame, right down into the corners. And so you can use those apertures if you want to achieve maximum performance. Now minimum aperture here is f16. But as per usual, diffraction does rob you of some contrast and detail, rendering a fine detail. So it's not as sharp as it is even at f1.4 wide open. Now, it's not as terrible as some that I've seen, but really I would stick with a maximum of f11, and going anywhere beyond that, you're just going to start to lose more than what you gain. Now looking at real-world images, they just look really fantastic. You can see here that detail is good everywhere we're looking in the frame. As we've already noted, lateral chromatic aberrations are quite well controlled. Colors are nice and rich. Just the overall look of images is really fantastic. Now, as noted earlier, you can get a higher magnification level if you focus in manually, which I've done here. And so this is showing the higher 0.17 times magnification. Now, that barrel distortion is obviously a factor here, but what I did notice is that despite the barrel distortion, the plane of focus is actually still really nice and flat. It's not like it's fading off towards the corners, and detail is fairly good. And so as a byproduct, you can get up close and put some things out of focus with this lens. For example, here, and I'm very, very close to the subject while I'm with this manual focus, but you can see that the detail is nice, and it does allow you to defocus a background at f1.4. A little bit further away here, but as you can see, the focus was nice and sharp, and the background, it looks fairly good. It's not like blown out completely amazing, but it looks fairly good. Likewise here, a little bit further out, but you can see detail is good on the subject, and the bokeh quality is fairly decent. Here's another that I really like, where I do like the look of the background, and I love the irony of this shot that this old can that's obviously been sitting in these woods for decades. It's not a new style at all. It says "Don't litter," and of course it itself is litter. So let's talk about flare resistance, which is obviously important in a wide-angle lens. You can see at f1.4, the sun coming through the trees there, there's really nothing to see. At f11, we can see the look of the 14-bladed sunburst effect that comes from the 7 aperture blades, which looks fairly nice. And you can see a little bit of a ghosting blob, but this was the only place that I was actually able to really create that. In this shot, for example, it's very backlit. There's bright sun in the frame, but yet, everything focused well, and there's no really apparent flare artifacts. Likewise here, you got a tiny bit of a kind of a flare artifact there, but again, bright evening sun, very directional, and still no major issue here. So overall, a very strong optical performance outside of that barrel distortion.
So at the end of the day, there's obviously a lot to praise about this particular lens. It is a lens that has high performance when everything from the build to the autofocus to the optical performance, and is going to give you a lot of good stuff in a very, very compact package. So it's a premium lens. It's basically a miniaturized G-Master kind of lens, although carrying only the G brand. We haven't yet seen the GM brand applied to anything in the APS-C space. But in many ways, it's going to perform similar to G-Master lenses when it comes to the feature set, the autofocus, and the optical performance. And so it is priced at a little bit more of a premium than what some alternative lenses. That Sigma that I referenced, its MSRP is about $450. The retail price has not yet been settled at the time I'm filming this review. It's before public release of the actual lens. And so Sony has given a range of $700 to $800, basically $699 to $799 US, and it will fall somewhere in between there. And so it's not at the place where I would call it necessarily a high value lens, a bargain lens, because it is priced in a little bit more premium space. But really this lens is pretty unique on the Sony platform in its combination of features, autofocus, and performance. So I don't think that it's overpriced either. Rather, this is something that we've seen very few of on Sony in the APS-C space. It is a premium APS-C specifically designed lens for this. In many cases, you've ended up maybe using full frame lenses to get good primes on your APS-C body. Well, now you're able to take advantage of the smaller form factor of a lens that is purposely engineered for that smaller sensor. So I think that this is going to be a very attractive lens for a lot of people. And the fact that Sony has thought about things when it comes to video, from the declicking to controlling focus breathing, various things like that, means that you're going to have a lens that is designed maybe for the kind of photography slash videography that really defines a lot of modern photographies. So at the end of the day, I think this is a lens that is going to be met with a warm welcome from the APS-C community. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review, also to an image gallery, and as soon as he gets it up, I will also share a link there to Craig's take that's a little bit more video focused, and taking a look at that. And you can also see, which is going up at the same time as this video, his coverage of the 10 to 20mm f4 power zoom lens. So you might want to check out that. There's also linkage to follow myself or Craig on social media, to become a patron. You can buy channel merchandise, and of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and let the light in.